Good evening, and if you're just tuning in, you are listening to UFO Paranormal Radio Network, otherwise known as United Public Radio Network, or we like to call it just UPRN, and you're listening to The Thing. Sorry, not the wrong show. The Angel Rock. Almost at the thing at the foot of the bed. That's my second show on Thursday nights. I'm your hostess, Lorilei Potvin. A little bit about myself. I'm a Canadian spiritual medium, crystal Reiki energy healer, Akashic Records practitioner, spiritual teacher, and mentor. I'm also a budding animal communicator, very well versed with near-death experiences and the paranormal. So welcome, you guys. Oh, happy birthday, Kathy Hanley Little. I got to say happy birthday. She said happy birthday to me. Hi, Diane. Welcome. So if you like what you see, please like, share, and subscribe. This network's been around for over 25 years. We stream multiple shows 7 days a week. And when we're not streaming live, the archive server randomly picks shows over the last 25 years. And you never know what you're going to find on the network. We always have new hosts and shows joining the network. So be sure to check it out and tell your friends and family, because there's something for everybody here. I also host a second show, I almost said, The Thing at the Foot of the Bed, on Thursdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with my good friend and very talented medium, David Hansel. So be sure to check that out. We got a few people popping in here. Good. So they usually wait a little bit because we usually start after the hour. I'll wait for the show before us to get finished and switch over. So I know more are going to be joining us. Also, don't forget, the network has its own TV channel. We are on Roku, and how you find that, you go to the channel store. You're going to type in UFO space P as in paranormal. There's a drop-down list. We're about the third or fourth one down, and you're looking for UFO, Paranormal, and United Public Radio. This show is streaming here tonight. I've switched things up, so we don't stream it on Thursday nights right now. I thought we'll try the Angel Rock for a while on Roku, but many of the shows are streaming over there. So if you want to watch it on your TV, please do so. Only thing you will know if you're watching, I can't see the comments from over there, and we are also streaming to my Instagram profile tonight. So if you are listening, I'm going to try to remember to pop over there to see the comments. It's a newer thing StreamYard's added, and they haven't integrated it into the main chat here yet. Now, we have a very interesting guest for you. I just about fainted when you guys hear this. My guest is indeed an Australian, but he has dual citizenship in Canada and Australia. I'm going to introduce him, but I got to say this because I'm still just flabbergasted. He is actually from where I live, where I've lived my whole life, in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. You guys have heard me talk about this before. I'm shocked, absolutely shocked. So I'm going to be reading his bio for y'all. Before I do, though, if you guys want to join in the conversation, 80% of our audience around the world is listening. So if you'd like to be part of the conversation, we got Halfway Paranormal here. Hi, Dylan. Nice to see you. Hi, Mish. She's over in Australia too. What you have to do, we're streaming over on UFO Paranormal and United Public Radio on Facebook and YouTube. We're streaming to my YouTube channel, which is The Angel Rock with Lorilei Potvin. We're streaming on Canada's Most Haunted, obviously UFO Paranormal Radio on Facebook, and my Instagram. So like I said, that's under the Angel Rock. So if you want to join in, we'd love to have you here. Both my shows are very audience participative. So on to my amazing hometown fellow guest this evening. I'm super excited about this. His name is Douglas Hodgson. He's a former dean and professor of law, currently residing in Perth, Western Australia. He undertook postgraduate legal study at the University of London before embarking on a 35-year career in higher education in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand as a teacher, researcher, scholar, human rights advocate, and university administrator. And we are going to be discussing his book tonight, Spiritual Revelations Beyond the Veil, and it's all about near-death experiences. Welcome, Douglas.
Thank you, Laura, for that wonderful introduction, and greetings from Australia to all of your audience. It's great to be with you, and I'm looking forward to sharing my research findings with you and your listeners.
Well, Michelle already added, she says, I'm a South Aussie, and I'm okay with that.
That's good. Well, I'm a sand groper from WA, so Yeah. We're the
I've
next state
never
over.
been speechless. I like you can ask Douglas. My
Mm.
mouth was like hanging open because you understand how big Canada is, and what's
Mhm.
Thunder Bay now? Maybe 100,000 people, if that. For to find a fellow guest I did not know is from my hometown city. So, tell us, how did you end up in Australia?
Well, I spent my first 30 years in Canada, in Thunder Bay, and after I graduated with a Master of Laws degree, I returned to Canada.
Mhm,
But the employment situation for lawyers in the early 80s was quite tight.
mhm.
So I ended up coming to Australia on a 4-year contract at
Okay,
Monash University in Melbourne.
right.
And I'm thinking that I'd only be here for the 4 years. And 40 years later, I'm still here and happily domiciled in Western Australia.
Well, there you go. You never know where the world's going to take you. But I mean, it really is a small place because when you start talking to people from around the world, you find out, like I said, you're from Thunder Bay, but never mind that.
Mhm.
It's almost like we really are 6 degrees of separation from people, if even that, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Michelle's really rare. She's oi, oi, oi. I know that. I know that here. Aussie, Aussie,
Yeah.
Aussie, oi,
Aussie,
oi,
Aussie,
oi.
Aussie, oi, oi, oi. We have some funny expressions down here.
They do. I have a lot of friends
Mhm.
from Australia, actually.
Mhm.
So, yeah, after a while, and the same is from the UK, you kind of have to learn some of the different terms, right? Versus the
Mhm.
Canadian and, well, North American terms that we use versus around the world.
Well,
So,
that's right, Laura. When I return to Canada on occasion and I start speaking, they say, "Well, where are you from? You have an accent." And when I come back to Australia, they say, "Well, where are you from? You have an accent." So I'm sort of a hybrid halfway in between Canada and Australia.
I did watch a little bit of an interview. I
Mhm.
try not to, but I was actually
Mhm.
looking for a picture of you because the one they have is really tiny on your
Mhm.
write up with the publisher. So I was looking for one in an interview, and I thought came up. So I thought, oh, I'll just have a quick listen, check out his energy.
Mhm.
And you did sound like you had a little bit of an Australian accent. I knew it wasn't completely Australian, so I guess it depends who you're talking to, right?
That's it.
So let's talk about this. So, what got you interested in near death experiences? Because you had said to me before the show you haven't actually had one, but what got you into writing about it? Because this is a pretty profound book that you've written.
Thank you, Laura. Approximately 3 decades ago,
Mhm,
I read a book titled Life After Life by
mhm.
Dr. Raymond Moody,
Okay.
his pioneering monograph into the so-called phenomenon of the near-death experience.
Mhm,
And I was really taken aback by what I read, because at that time I would describe myself as more of a religious than a spiritual person.
mhm,
But I was totally captivated and fascinated by what I read.
mhm.
But being a busy university academic, I had very little time for my own recreational or hobby reading.
Right.
And it wasn't until I retired at the beginning of 2018 that a whole new world opened up to me. And one of the first books that I read was Dr. Eben Alexander's Proof of Heaven, a
What a book to start
theologian's
with.
journey into the afterlife.
Mhm,
And once again, I was blown away by Dr. Alexander's really graphic and detailed account of the afterlife and the higher spiritual realms. So I tend to be a curious person by nature.
mhm.
And as I get older, I find myself becoming more spiritual than religious, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
So I began reading all I could on the near death experience. And I actually found the EANS website, the International Association of Near Death.
I just mentioned that before we started. Yeah.
And they have a wonderful archives of hundreds upon hundreds of written accounts written by people who have had an out of body experience. So I began reading them with great interest, and they varied. Some of them were relatively short, others were quite lengthy.
Mhm.
Some of them were written in very good English, others, the English and grammar, etc., was quite suspect, but it didn't matter. It was the messaging that really mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And the more accounts I read, the more I found that these people seemed to be saying the very same thing, but in slightly different or nuanced ways.
Absolutely.
So, being a good university academic, I began collating the information. And lo and behold, soon after that, chapter headings started to fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I wasn't convinced. I wasn't convinced that there was yet a book in it. But then I started reading accounts from NDEs who said, I was at the veil, and the being of light told me that my mission on earth had not been completed,
Mm-hmm.
that I must return to my body and complete my earthly mission. And part of that mission was to communicate with humanity all of the divine knowledge, messaging, and revelations that had been imparted to my soul consciousness by the light.
Mm-hmm.
So before they knew it, they were pulled back into their bodies
Mm-hmm.
and they were left with this very vivid, detailed experience, and they felt compelled to share it with the world. And the way that many of them did it was to write an account of their experience and to put it on the EN's website. So that
Right.
was the basis of my research material.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's, you know what, and Dr. Eben Alexander, I said, what a book to start with, because if anybody doesn't know who he was a highly respected neurosurgeon in his field. And for people listening, I know you know, but he was a staunch atheist, had no belief in an afterlife or anything like this. And I'm going to tell a short version of the story. Obviously, he had came down with meningitis and ended up having a near death experience, or as we call it in the field, an NDE. And he afterwards, his life was changed, and now he writes books, he goes around the world talking about all this stuff. And you hear this over and over from people, especially those that had no belief in an afterlife. And again, what really gets me going, because as I said to you before, and I've said many times on the show, is that I believe I had a near death experience as a toddler. So I'm going to be 59 in August. So it's a little difficult for me to recall the whole experience. But the really strange thing for myself is when people talk about the colors and the music and maybe what they've seen and the communicate, all it comes flooding right. I'm getting goosebumps as I talk. I always say that's my sign for truth. And it's like, I know it, but we don't have the words in the English language to explain it. And it's so profound to hear when people, like I say, will say NDE instead of the big long term. But my whole point is I get upset with people sometimes. I don't say it, but when people say, well, it's a typical NDE, I don't think there is anything such as a typical NDE. Now, what are your thoughts from looking sort of from the outside, but doing a fair amount of research?
Well, I agree, Laura, that each NDE is unique,
Mm-hmm.
just as each soul consciousness is unique to the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
But there are common themes or messaging which can be
Sure.
distilled from the experience. And if I can share with your audience
Please do.
two quotations that, to my mind, describes the pure essence of the NDE.
Okay.
First quotation is from a French philosopher, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin,
Mm-hmm.
and he said that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience.
Mm-hmm.
The other quotation I'd like to share with you and your audience is a Taoist proverb from the Tao Te Ching, chapter 50. And it goes like this: life is a venturing forth, death is a returning home.
That's what I call it.
Now, I'd like to return to a number of your previous points. Dr. Alexander was an avowed atheist. He came from a medical and scientific community that had basically been saying for the past 3 centuries, if something cannot be touched or felt or seen with the naked eye,
Mm-hmm.
or otherwise perceived with our human senses,
Mm-hmm.
it cannot be considered real. And my experience in reading over 500 NDE accounts is that unanimously they reject that earthly assertion. It's an earthly construct. This ship
Absolutely.
are. And the realm of spirit, the world of spirit, is the ultimate reality. So we dream at night and we wake up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
We think to ourselves, that dream was nice, but it wasn't real. That our waking earthly consciousness is real.
Mm-hmm.
But in the ears, when they describe the ultimate reality, they say that our earthly life is a mere dream or illusion, that the ultimate reality is the world of spirit. And
Mm-hmm.
if you look at religions of the East, like Hinduism,
Mm-hmm.
they have a concept of Maya, and they're totally in agreement, Hinduism and the NDEs, that our earthly life, although it may seem real to us, is unreal. It's an illusion. It's a dream compared to the ultimate reality of heaven, the higher spiritual realms, whatever you want to call it. And I just one final point
Absolutely.
to come back to the points you raised. Yes, many of the NDErs whose accounts I read, they said that before their experience, they were agnostics or they were atheists.
Mm-hmm.
They either did not believe in God or they believed in an afterlife or didn't believe in God, or they didn't believe in both. But without exception, they all said that now I have certainty of proof and knowledge of God, the afterlife, and heaven. Conversely, there were many people who said that before their NDE, they were very religious, strictly religious,
Yes.
but afterwards, in time, they felt themselves much closer to nature. They felt more spiritual and religious. And some of them even found themselves to be pantheists, at one with nature, and
Mm-hmm.
an intense love for nature. So the points you raised really excited me, and I had to respond to them. Thank you.
I love that because these are things that I talk about when I say being a spiritual teacher and mentor. Um, I work with quite a few people because I'm finding we have to be careful what words we use because we're on YouTube here. But over the last almost 4 years, I'm finding a lot of people are waking up, and they're waking up in many arenas, especially when it comes to why am I here? Why am I here? Why do I feel like I'm at a crossroads? Why do I feel like I can't find my life purpose? And so they're starting to seek out other avenues, such as, and I don't want to make it sound elitist, I don't mean it that way, but someone such as myself who's been following this path. And believe it or not, mine started many years ago, but when I really became well aware of what my gifts were, I'd been using them my whole life, was through an extreme, profound paranormal experience. Quite evil, actually. We shared it on the Travel Channel's Paranormal Survivor, and it turned into a full-time job, looking and pursuing, like, where is this coming from? Why are we experiencing this? And I really believe, had I not gone through the experience I did in my previous home, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. But when we liken that to near death experiences, where this began was years ago for me. I remember this as clear as it was yesterday. I was 17 years old. I was going to Lakehead University. I know you may recognize that university from Thunder Bay.
I went to Lakehead University too.
Okay. I was going in to get my Bachelor of Science in Nursing. It was my first year. And I signed up for a magazine called Nursing, and it was whatever year it was. So it was Nursing 1984. It was the first issue that came. And on the front of the cover, the first thing I saw was, "Why are we always eating our young?" And I went, on a nursing magazine, and it was talking about how, as senior nurses, not having the patience and the fortitude and the strength and the patience to mentor our new nurses coming in, and they're your future. But the most profound thing for me was it was talking about nurses who had witnessed miraculous things and what patients experienced with near-death experiences. And then I was hooked. At that time, I didn't realize I'd had a near-death experience as a toddler. And the first book I read was by Betty Eadie, Enter into the Light, and I was hooked. I was hooked. I had to know everything that was about it. Then I started talking to patients about it, and you knew from knowing a patient beforehand and them having a cardiac arrest and being resuscitated and coming back. And I was explaining this to you before we went live, that I worked nights. So, once the work was done and I became a nurse to become be with people, not to do all the technical stuff, although I loved it. And some of the things these patients would tell me, you knew darn well that when they said it was like I left my body and I was on top of the ceiling and then I was able to go wherever I thought. And the things they were explaining there, and I understand that hearing is the last sense to go, whether we're in a coma or we're transitioning from this life back home, as I call it. But there were things they knew and things they had saw that you knew they had no knowledge of. And to me, there is no question that there's an afterlife. There isn't. And though I would refer to God as source, and that's usually what I have found with people with near-death experiences, that they will refer to God as source. Have you found that yourself?
Yes, Laura, the NDEs tend to use varied terms. Some
Mhm.
of them use God,
Yeah.
many of them use source, and in
Mhm.
my book, I actually use them interchangeably.
Mhm.
Some people refer to God as the supreme being or the
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
universal consciousness or the universal data structure. But yes, they use different terminology, but the description is the same. One NDEer described God as love. Well,
Yeah.
that shouldn't be of any surprise to us. But what made her description or his description unique was they used love as an acronym. So L standing for love, O standing for oneness, V standing for vibrations, and E standing for energy.
Ah,
So many of the NDEers describe God as a being without form,
yeah.
pure white energy and vibrations
Mhm.
that connects everyone and everything at the deepest foundational level, animates and connects all that is. And of course, is omnipresent and omniscient or all knowing.
Mhm.
So, yes, there are different labels that are attached to God, but it's actually what God is that's, in my humble opinion, the most important.
Sorry, just waving hello. Sorry. I'm dying to ask you so many questions, especially since you research. So I'll try to remember that one I want to ask you about children, but I always love to hear people's take, especially if the amount of research you've done. Two things. First of all, somebody from Australia I've had on the show before, Stephen Chong, he hasn't had an actual near death experience, but it was akin to a near death experience. I know a few people like that the heart did not stop, the breathing did not stop, but they had a near death experience, if you will. I wanted to ask you about that, and also if you ran into any people who claim to have had a hell like experience. So I know it's two questions, but
Right. Well, I think most of the accounts that I was dealing with dealt with people who actually were clinically dead. Their heart had stopped
yeah.
beating,
Hmm.
and they had this out of body experience.
Hmm.
they found themselves going down a very dark, what they would describe as a tunnel of light, or some of them refer to a deep, dark valley, and they are impelled, their soul is impelled almost like a magnetic force
Mhm.
towards a pinprick of white light at the end of the tunnel. Um, Others use the term out-of-body experience.
Mhm.
And for example, you've referred to them being in an operating theater, and
Mhm.
suddenly they find their soul or consciousness outside their physical body,
Mhm.
and they're looking down at their body, which is on a surgical operating table. So that's typical of the types of NDE or OBE that I read. But there were certain descriptions that I would call negative
Mhm.
rather than positive, but relatively few in number, Laura.
True.
I would estimate maybe at most 10% of
Yeah.
the accounts I
Mhm.
read, maybe 10% um, were on the dark or negative side. And I would put those into three different categories. Number one, I would call a transitional experience. So the soul or consciousness leaves the body, but for some reason does not go down the tunnel of light. As one NDEer said, they may fear or not accept the beauty of God and will not proceed down the tunnel of light, resists going down the tunnel.
Mhm.
Um, it could be that the soul or consciousness is too attached to something in the earthly realm. So
Okay.
it might not want to leave its home. It may have lived in that home for 30 or 40 years and just does not want to detach from it. Or it may not want to leave behind a loved one or a pet or a treasured chattel. So they are caught in between of their own volition or free will, and they're neither here nor there. They're not part of the earthly realm because they're out of their body,
Mhm.
but they're not in the heavenly or the spiritual realms because they've been offered that choice and they've uh, decided not to proceed to those realms. Now, in Western terminology, I think the term is a disembodied spirit.
Oh yeah, we've run into those.
In Asian culture, they call them hungry ghosts.
Mhm.
But that is the first type of what I would call a negative or dark experience. The second one is defined from an emotional perspective. So um, the experience of hell is an absence of the presence of God. It's being in darkness and alone. There is no light. There
Mhm.
is no evidence of the presence of God. And this has been described as a type of hell. The third type of hellish or negative experience I would describe as a sensory experience.
Mhm.
And I can give you two examples.
Okay.
One example was where the soul or the consciousness was being accompanied by a being of light. It might have been the guardian angel or a spirit guide. And for whatever reason, and apparently, according to the NDEs, everything happens for a higher purpose. The soul was taken to a very dark place of negative energy, and there was screams of wailing, anguish,
Mhm. Yep.
pain, and suffering. And the soul or the consciousness was being cocooned in the white light of this being of light. And the being of light said telepathically to the soul, you have been taken here for a reason, but I caution you that if you step out from the protection of my white light, you will never leave this place. The other uh, negative example of a dark sensory experience was to the effect that the soul or the consciousness was taken to a very similar place. And this time, the soul, with its soul vision, could see humanoid forms, but they were part of a dark wall. And you couldn't see the torso of the humanoid form because it was embedded in this wall. All that you could see were the arms coming out of the wall and half of the head, including the face. And again, these humanoid forms were in a state of anguish, of supreme suffering and despair. And the solar consciousness was shown this, perhaps as part of the so-called life review, before they reincarnate into a new form. So those were the three types of negative experiences I encountered. But to be fair, to be honest, the purpose of my book is to focus on the light and the positive energy, and perhaps that's the topic for another book, either by myself or someone else who is so inclined.
Well, I ask you, I have a theory. I always tell people I don't have all the answers, but if everything is energy, which I believe it is, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can be transferred from one place to another. But I also truly believe there are different dimensions and realms, if you will. And the reason why I say that is, and I mentioned this many times, especially on the other show. I adore my co-host, but he doesn't tend to believe in more negative type experiences for human beings on this planet with something not from the earthly realm. And I've experienced it myself. I know other people have. Could be something I've contracted to experience, could be many reasons. My whole point of this is I'm wondering, like, not everybody's running around thinking love and light. They're not. There's some people that think some pretty dark things. And I think part of my reason for being here is to remind, not that I'm going to reach the whole world, but my point is to remind people of how powerful we really are as human beings in the way of the gifts that we have and all the things we've been told aren't possible, like telepathy and telekinesis and things like that. My whole point is, and I've seen this, is I often wonder, and I agree with many of the things you mentioned, maybe why someone's had a negative experience. And I don't want to focus the whole thing on this. It's just, I think it goes without saying, because you will see people that'll see this with a near-death experience, right? And it's very rare. But I'm wondering if their heart hasn't quite stopped, like maybe there's 1 or 2 beats per minute or so, or you know what I mean? They haven't quite left the earthly realm. And instead of when we leave, we either pop out of the body, like you said, I want to call it the earthly body, the soul, whatever. I like to call it the soul, right? We pop out. But if we're not quite there, and instead of coming from earth, the magnetic pull right back home, that they get stuck in one of these more lower, deeper realms. You know what I mean? Where the negative energy is, where negative things are or could possibly be. So I always ask people about this when they come on to talk about near-death experiences, because like I said, I don't have all the answers. I'm just still trying to learn. And I wonder if that makes sense. Because just to add to that, I love this podcast on YouTube. It's called the Next Level Soul Podcast. Have you heard of it before?
No, I haven't,
Oh,
Laura.
you got to check it out. Oh, it's awesome. It's Alex, I think Ferrari is his last name. I think he was a director in Hollywood. And now he's been pulled towards doing this podcast. So there's people from all walks of life, including people who have had near-death experiences. He had one woman that has had 4 so far. I can't even imagine 4 NDEs. And she's not an older lady. Like, she's maybe in her 40s and comes back each time with something new and something different. And you do hear about people telling their stories once in a while of a negative experience. So you've given me lots of food for thought here to think about, because I don't think I've heard about all of these things you've shared tonight about that. So thank you.
Well, Laura, if I can add to what you've said, there could well be levels of hell, if I can put it that way, but I didn't read anything to that effect in the NDE accounts.
Mm-hmm.
What I did read was that at least one NDEer said that there's not just one heaven, there
I've heard
are multiple heavens.
that.
Now, interestingly, Muslims believe the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Islam says that there are 7 heavens,
Mm-hmm.
one on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at Eastern religions, such as Jainism, they refer to the concept of ascending heavens.
Mm-hmm.
So, by corollary and by logic or by reason, there may be descending hells, if I can put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure in terms of your premise about people leaving the body but still having a heartbeat, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why they're experiencing these hellish experiences. I cannot really usefully comment on that because I don't
And that's
recall
okay. I just thought
reading
I'd
anything
ask
to
about
that
it.
effect.
Mm-hmm.
But it may well be that, that they somehow enter these uh, lower realms of existence for their own edification or evolution of their soul consciousness.
I agree because it could be anything too from the religious dogma. They're feeling guilty maybe about something that they did on this earth and believing that hell awaits them. I mean, there's many different reasons, right? It just as many reasons as why we come here. And every one of us is here for a reason, as I'm sure you've probably discovered with this spiritual journey. There's a
Yes,
lineup, from what I understand, with connecting with my own guides and teachers on the other side. There's a lineup to come here because I always say we come here with most of us with spiritual amnesia. We don't remember our previous lifetimes or
hmm,
what we've learned or accrued or whatever that may be. And we come in these dense, heavy, fragile bodies, right? And it's the place that you come for the most possibility to learn and grow for the soul. Did you find that in your
absolutely,
research?
Laura.
Mhm.
I certainly did. As one NDEer said, each of us comes to planet Earth. Um, we each have a unique and tailored mission. And that mission may not be prominent in terms of the standards of the world, but for each soul, it is most significant. So we are here to learn, to acquire divine knowledge, but
Mhm.
it goes beyond that.
Mhm.
We are here to learn what unconditional love is,
Absolutely.
the purest form of love, a love for all that is, a love that does not attach strings to its flow, a love that does not differentiate or distinguish in any circumstances. So we will be asked in our life review, how did you treat others? Did you manifest unconditional love and assistance towards them? What did you learn? And particularly, what did you learn from any mistakes you might have made? Um, Also, it's a universal law, so I understand from the end to ears, that earthly life, we are intended to have problems and challenges, trials and tribulations,
Mhm.
because that's the only way our soul learns, evolves, progresses. So, most of us, when we encounter an obstacle in our life, we tend to grizzle, we complain. But the end of years, without exception, say, hey, this is an opportunity. Look at them positively.
Mhm.
That each obstacle or burden in our life is an opportunity to discern what particular lesson we were sent to this realm to learn and to master. And you're quite right. According to the NDEs, when we come to planet Earth, we live, we leave a state of virtual all knowingness, and we come here and the delete button is hit, and we
Mhm.
forget most of the divine knowledge. There must be a higher purpose for that. I'm sure there is. But I'm quite excited about this. Thought of something else. As another NDEer said, trust your intuition.
Mm-hmm.
because you might know something and you don't recall ever reading it in a book or ever being told of it by
Mm-hmm.
someone, but you just know it's true. It's a fact. It's part of universal knowledge.
Claircognizance,
Yes. And
clairsentience.
The NDEs say trust your intuition
Mm-hmm.
because that is what you know in between incarnations in the world of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But when you come to planet Earth, most of the divine knowledge is erased or wiped. But there's a subconscious level of what you know is a universal law, so go with it.
I agree with you. And like when I started to mention that podcast, I got so excited. Next Level Soul podcast about the NDEs on there. But there are also, those that speak about like the power of positivity, the power of love, unconditional love. But the ones that really, really fascinate me are those that channel from the other side. And it was
Mhm.
really interesting. This one lady, she's actually a scientist. I forget her last name. Her first name is Belinda. And she channels the 12 angels. Like it's like a chorus of angels, if you will. It's a collective consciousness that she does. And it made, I don't know, see how this rings with you, but she had, when she was channeling, she had said that when we're back home, people want to call it heaven, whatever they want to call it, right? She said, we know nothing but love, right? And the English word of love isn't even enough to even begin to explain the power and depth of that emotion, but we know nothing else. So we do come here to grow and evolve our souls and learn. But some of the things she had said was, it's kind of like, how can you know hot without knowing cold? How can you know what I mean? So she said that we also come here to
Mhm.
experience the breadth and depth of human emotion. And because all we know is love. So when we do go back home, right, we know the difference. I don't know if it's almost like an appreciation more of it. Did you see anybody talking about that in your research at all?
Yes, I did, Laura. Actually, uh, the points you make are the experience of the NDEs, that they face two primary obstacles in conveying to their readers what they experienced. Number one, human language is just too impoverished to convey the richness and depth of meaning. One NDE described it this way: it's like trying to depict a magnificent sunset by drawing it in sand with a stick. It
True.
just cannot be done. You can never do it justice.
Hmm.
The other main impediment to conveying the richness and depth of the experience is that we are confined to the earthly realm. All we've known during our incarnation is our earthly experience.
Hmm.
And unless you've had an OBE or an NDE, you've had no experience. You've not lived or sensed the higher realms.
Hmm.
So, as you say, it's a bit like trying to describe an orange if you've never seen one or tasted one.
Hmm.
So, those are the two main impediments.
Hmm.
But they all say that they cannot do justice to what they felt and experienced in the higher realms.
Hmm.
And they say that negative energy is not permitted to enter into the higher spiritual realms
Yes, nothing but
because
love.
it is incompatible with unconditional love.
Hmm.
So what is allowed into the higher realms? Well, of course, unconditional love, peace, bliss, euphoria, acceptance, forgiveness, patience, beauty. All of these things are what the NDErs describe as positive energy. And if you look at the sacred scriptures of mainstream religions, it would be considered to be divine virtues or universal ethical principles.
Hmm.
So they experience this, they come back, and they try to explain it, and they feel hamstrung in their attempts to do so by these impediments that I've referred to. But many of them, to their credit, do a magnificent job. And
I agree.
there's one, if I can share with you and your
Please
audience,
do. Hmm.
one particular description that I read of the ultimate reality. And this NDEer said that my experience was like reading a book on a hot summer day. You're sitting under a tree and you're deeply engrossed in the book that you are reading, so much so that you lose all track of the time and even where you were. So suddenly you're startled and you put the book down and you realize that you're sitting under this beautiful tree on a hot summer afternoon in the countryside. And this NDEer said, life is like the book. We become so absorbed in our earthly incarnation with accruing power, wealth, fame, etc., that we lose sight of our cosmic perspective. So putting aside the book, putting aside our human life or incarnation, we reconnect with what truly matters, with all of these universal laws and the divine knowledge. So I wanted to share that with your viewers. And that is one of the best descriptions I found of the so-called ultimate reality, or as you've referred to as home.
I do. It just feels that way when I feel into it, going home. And I don't know if it's maybe some of the things I've looked at, but some people have had so many different profound experiences rather than, many people describe the light and going through the tunnel, but I've heard other people talk about going with their guide. They didn't know who this being was, but they knew they were pure love, but they traveled throughout the whole galaxy and the universe, and they were trying to
Mhm.
explain what they were seeing while they're going through it. There's another one, I forget his name, and he's talked did a talk for Ions on YouTube. He was on the Next Level Soul podcast, and he was talking about, he was very successful, happily married, had a little baby, and had a 3-year-old, and they got in a car accident. And his wife died instantly, and the baby died instantly. And the little guy, the 3-year-old, was still alive. And he had an NDE, and he wanted to go with his wife. And his wife told him, no, you have to be there for our son. And he had a horrific recovery. But I remember he explained, and it was a dream. And he actually was back home, and he got to hug his wife to say goodbye finally. And
Mhm.
his baby picked the baby up in the crib. Did you hear? I forget what his name is. I want to say it's Brian. Every time I hear him speak, and I'm not a crier, I'm just in
Mhm.
tears because he speaks so beautifully. And to explain this experience, it's so profound. Did you find different experiences like that at all with your research?
Actually, Laura, I've had that experience myself on
Oh,
more than
really?
one occasion. Yes. I've never had an out-of-body experience or an
Mhm.
NDE, but I've had very vivid lucid dreams of the final farewell. It's more like an au revoir
Mhm.
until we meet again.
Yes.
So it's not a final
A
goodbye.
bientôt.
Yes.
Until we see each other
So
again.
I
Mhm.
can relate to what you've just said. But many of the NDEers do report that when they're at the veil and they're not allowed to cross over, they can't. Because if they cross over, then they can't return to their earthly body. But beyond the veil, they see humanoid forms and they consider that some of those would be deceased friends, family, relatives, acquaintances.
Mhm.
So they're waiting there for us. So some of them, in fact, one of the NDEers said that if you're involved in a catastrophic accident, and apparently we feel no pain.
True.
So shortly before the impact, we
Mhm.
are cocooned in God's love. This is what the NDEers say.
Mhm.
So we experience physical death, It's the release or separation from the body of the heavenly umbilical cord. And the soul then travels down the tunnel of light. But what the NDEs have said is that if in the catastrophic accident your body is so badly mangled and your mental faculties so badly impaired, you will have no choice. You will not be permitted to return to your body because there is no hope of
Yeah.
recovery. So you must proceed through the veil or through the archway or cross over the pond, what have you. So that is what I recall the experience of catastrophic accidents.
Hmm.
But most of them are able to return because they have not been injured that badly. And in any event, their life mission is not finished.
Hmm.
They may have dependents that they must care for, or they might have a wider mission, but their mission isn't finished. And that's why they're not allowed to proceed through the veil, even though they very much like to, because emotionally they're in a state of nirvana, utter peace, happiness, bliss, euphoria, etc. And when they're told by the being of light, you must return to their body, and many of them argue. They say, no, I'd like to stay here. I'm enjoying it too much. Before they know it, the magnetic pole pulls them back and flood back in their physical bodies.
Some of the ones I've looked at, though, and it's interesting. Like I said, I've run into quite a few people for some reason. Maybe I'm just meant to that haven't really had an NDE. I don't know. Have you ever run into Garnet Michael Schulhauser? He's Canadian. He's a lawyer. He met his spirit guide on the street and a homeless man named Albert. I had him on my show. He's fascinating. And Albert never had an NDE, but Albert took him all over the place. Like he claims he did go back home. I've met a few people like this that have told me. I had two people on my podcast on my previous network didn't have a clue what I was doing, and I said yes to a show Monday through Friday. Don't guess. I don't even know how I did it. So the first week I was on, I had two people that didn't know each other. Neither one of them had had a near-death experience, but they'd had like an OB, out-of-body experience. The two of them were explaining, finishing each other's sentences about buildings on the other side, and it was mind-blowing. And I wish to
Mhm.
God they never gave us copies of our previous episodes. I Like I said, Stephen Chong, who's from Australia, he's coming back on actually for those of you they were really interested, like because people are very interested in this topic, right? Because that's the biggest
Mhm.
thing, the fear about what happens to us when we die. And he didn't have a near-death experience. He had a horrific fall off of a ladder, and he had what you might call an OBE. But he too was able to explain sort of what happens in a near-death experience. So the way I look at this is, I think like our life, I don't think is predetermined, but I think we contract for certain things to happen throughout our lifetime. Maybe we've contracted it in, we know the way we're going to be living our life generally, and it
Mhm.
gets us back on the right path or whatever it may be. Did you find that in your research too, or did you find something different?
No, I did, Laura. I found about a dozen or so accounts that described what I would call the so-called soul agreement.
Hmm.
And there's something similar that can be found in the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Okay.
But it out of over 500 NDE accounts, I only discerned about 12 of them that had referred to this concept of a soul agreement.
Hmm.
But the soul agreement, apparently between incarnations and after we've had our life review, we, on a collegial basis, um, communicate with our spirit guides, our guardian angels, and perhaps even God on the layout or the overall or overarching plan of our next incarnation. So basically, what continent we're going to be born on, the approximate length of our lifetime, um, the type of family we're going to be born into and the circumstances of the community that we are born into. And those overarching parameters are contained in the soul agreement. And apparently, they cannot be unilaterally changed or modified by us, by the soul consciousness. So when we are born, that has already been predetermined, the length of our life on Earth. However, that said, how we live our life very much depends on us.
True.
We get to choose our life experiences. That's why we are given the gift or privilege of free will.
Agreed.
We can choose our own life experiences, the people we meet, the path we follow, the places we travel to, etc., etc. It's up to us when we reach the proverbial fork in the road, whether we choose the higher or the lower ground, whether we embrace positive energy or what religion would call the divine virtues or universal ethical principles, or if we follow the dark path of negative energy, because we are here to learn, to evolve and progress our soul consciousness. And if we follow the light, the positive energy, or if we follow the dark negative energy, that will impact on, of course, our next life review and our next incarnation and the quality thereof. So, as part of the life review, the beings of light caution us. They say you must be very careful in the free choices that you make, because even inadvertently, you might think that you're making a completely innocent choice, but that may negatively impact on countless others. So, in exercising our free will and in determining the choices we must make, we perhaps should not act that spontaneously, but to act according to divine wisdom and knowledge in making those choices. Because, as the life review will teach us, many of the choices we make, we don't realize, even in our thoughts, let alone the words we choose or the actions we take, will have ripple effects on countless others.
Absolutely.
So if we manifest love to another person, that person in turn, because we were kind to them, they will manifest kindness and assist others. And we get to see that in our life review. But if we act unkindly and insensitively to others, they in turn might take that negative energy that we have given to them and might pass that negative energy on to others. So there are two metaphors that the NDEs use. It's like dropping a pebble into the middle of a still pond, and the ripple effects go outwards to eternity. Or you might knock the first domino in a series of dominoes,
Yeah.
and they topple others, and this is endless. So, as part of the life review, you not only see how your positive and negative conduct impacted others, both positively and negatively, but you are able to see all of the possibilities that were open to you when you reached the proverbial fork in the road, but you chose not to take for your own reasons, and they may have been selfish ones. So,
The one
fascinating.
thing I want to ask you, and I'm going to say hi to Carol and Mario and just because I have seen this with Diane Brighton says, here, I'll highlight it. And she says, I met Gabriel in my near-death experience at age 4, and I had a choice to stay or go back. I have seen that quite a bit. But before we talk about that, I do want to ask you, because From what I understand from a life review, that it's not punitive. The only person who's the hardest on you is yourself. And from what I understand, is that yes, indeed, I agree with what you say here about you review what you've done in life, including there was one lady I was looking at her near death experience, and she had done a lot of charity work and big things and got a lot of, notoriety and publicity for it. And so in her life review, she said she was expecting to be applauded and, like, look at this great thing you did. And the biggest thing for her coming back, she had said, that, which was so astounding, was it wasn't those things that she learned the most from or anything positive really came out of it. It was the little tiny things that she did for other people in kindness, that exactly what you said with the ripple effect, and what a profound experience it was for that other person, say a little elderly person needing help putting groceries in the car or what have you. But as I understand from the near death experience, though, that not it's not punitive, the life review, because from what I understand, yes, your guides will be with you, could be loved ones, it's usually your guides or angels, but it's ourselves who are the hardest on ourselves when we see the choice that we made that maybe wasn't made in love, it was made in selfishness, and how horrible we feel about it when we see or we get to experience the feelings that other people experience because of our actions. And then at the end of it, the person is asked, I understand that, but what did you learn? There was no punishment with it in any way, shape, or form. And I'd love to hear what your research showed you.
Sure, Laura. You raised some really interesting points, and I'd like to respond to each of them.
Okay.
Unanimously, the NDEs say that we are not judged by the source on a reward punishment basis.
Mhm.
And the NDEs were told by the light that many of the social, cultural, and belief systems that we have on Earth um, impede or hinder our ability to understand eternal truths and universal laws. And the NDEs say that we judge ourselves. We don't
Yes.
really judge ourselves. We are not condemning ourselves, but we are life reviewing ourselves with
Uh-huh.
the assistance of a being of light.
Yes.
As you said, and as one NDEer commented, why is that so? Because we are our harshest critic,
We sure are.
but we are led through it. And
With love.
it is. And
No,
it's
but with love, we're led through it with love, right? Like we're not left to feel these horrible feelings, judging ourselves. That's what every case I've looked at, the person has said, and there's this being of light with nothing but love and saying, okay,
Mhm.
what did you learn from it? Right?
Exactly. And one of the NDEers said, in the life review, there's no praise or blame.
True.
And all that you've done on earth is not so much wrong. Wrong is a pejorative term, but what you did was not helpful to progressing your soul or your consciousness. It
Mhm.
did not progress your evolutionary journey. And if I can come back to Dr. Eben Alexander's book, Proof of Heaven,
Mhm.
he indicated in his book, if I can recall correctly what he said, he was told by the light that there's nothing that you can do that is wrong.
True.
And, and that baffled me when I read his book. What does he mean by that? Because surely there are many things that we've done in life that are palpably wrong and unethical. But I think this is the point, that it's the life review is done with love and compassion,
Mhm.
and it's an exercise in self-realization. And if you look at Indian religions, such as Buddhism and Hinduism,
Mhm.
what is enlightenment for a Hindu or a Buddhist? It's simply a recognition that there is only oneness, only monism,
Mhm.
no such thing as dualism as we experience in the earthly realm.
True.
We are separate. We live in a realm of separation and separateness. The observer and the observed are different. You and I are looking at each other half a world away. But in the world of spirit, as one NDEer said, when you leave your physical body, you leave behind the body,
Hmm.
you leave behind your earthly identity, you leave behind your possessions, your pain and suffering, your earthly worries and anxieties, everything you've accumulated materially, you leave
Hmm.
behind. You leave behind your power, your wealth. And the end of the year, she said, I left me behind. When I was in the world of spirit, I was everything, and everything was me.
Yeah.
There was just oneness.
Hmm.
So the Hindus and Buddhists will call that enlightenment or being absorbed into Brahman or nirvana. And the NDEs would say that's the ultimate goal in self-realization, that all of us have different levels of consciousness, of spiritual awareness,
Okay.
but we're all on the same pathway to God. We share that in common. And according to the NDEs, the ultimate goal here is eventual communion or absorption into the light. And at that point, our desires, our cravings, our grasping cease. And we no longer come back either to earth or reincarnate into other physical or non-physical realms of existence.
Okay, we have a question here, but one thing I was going to say, I like this, and I don't know, I can't quote who said it, but I love it, is we're all just walking each other home, right? Because you're right, we are in all different levels of spiritual enlightenment, if you will. But where people have a hard time, like I was staunchly raised Roman Catholic, I was forced to go to church every Sunday, I was forced to go to Catholic school. I never really connected with it. For me, my belief is God. I respect all other people's beliefs. And my theory is that I think that if we truly come from a place of love and try to be in a place of service to others rather than service to self, that usually that's a pretty good steering guide I found for myself anyways in life, including when I found, you know, recently, and I'm going to give a shout out to Julie Jean Bassett. She's here. Jonathan's here. Welcome. And I worked with Julie Jean Bassett. She's an animal communicator, phenomenal, as well as a shamanic practitioner. And something I pretty well blocked out of my mind as a small child, and it's been starting to come back in flashbacks. And it was something pretty horrific that should never be done to a small child, ever, ever, ever. And at first, I couldn't even deal with it when it became a realization with working with her. And then all of a sudden, it was like a realization came to me. This was a role this person is playing that did what they did to me in this human form, if you will, because I always say we're human here, but when we return back home, we're our whole self. And that's kind of what I was sort of taking from how you were explaining this, or did I misunderstand you? And then I'm going to read Kathy's question.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right.
Did it make sense? Like, does that make sense to you that we're kind of just playing a role as a human here? But when we go back home, we are kind of our whole, our true self, because we're human beings come with frailties. I mean, you know what I mean? Like we can have the duality, the good, the bad, the dark, the light. You know what I mean? Versus there's none of that when we go back home. It's just love.
Many of the NDEers say that we live our life on Earth in a cameo role, and
Yes.
we are playing our role.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a university of life. So we've been assigned a particular role. And one NDEer commented that sometimes we experience in our lives unresolved problems or tensions or complications from previous incarnations. And these have accumulated and they're still playing out in our present incarnation.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't try to resolve those
Mm-hmm.
problems with positive energy, those problems and unresolved issues will continue to follow us into future incarnations. And I do recall reading some NDE accounts where um, soul consciousnesses follow each other into future lifetimes and connect.
Oh,
Maybe
absolutely.
not
I forgot
in
to
the
add one thing with that big long thing I shared. Where I was going with this, with the role, okay, that helped me forgive this person is where I was going to go with this. And I forgot to add that I was thinking about this. It helped me forgive them because it almost became like a bigger picture to me that this is the role they're playing in this lifetime, but this isn't who they are when we're all back home together. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like they're in that human perspective right now, but you're, how do I want to say, more whole? You're who you really are, I guess,
oh
in
yeah.
a soul form is what I'm trying to say.
Well, when we go home, Laura, I believe that we tap into varying levels of omniscience, and we are whole. The life review has been described as a purification or cleansing of the soul.
Mhm.
So we are, I suppose, as perfect as we can get without being a totally enlightened soul. So we are sent to Earth to learn these various experiences.
Mhm.
But we are assigned roles in life, and we encounter energies that we may have encountered in previous lifetimes, but it's up to us how we deal with it in this lifetime. And if it's forgiveness, if our main lesson in this lifetime is to engage in radical forgiveness, which is one of the most powerful positive energies, then that is our cameo role that we've been assigned to
I think
forgive.
we choose it. I think we choose to come here, and I think we choose the roles. And I think we come in with a soul group. Like there's a core group that we choose to have part. Like the way it was described by, and again, I'm not great at quotations here, but I've seen so many NDEs talk about this too, that when they look back, they went, holy cow, it was just a big play. Like it was like, this was my play and here's all the players that are in, and I could see all the roles waiting to come in. Did you run into that at all in
Well,
your research?
many of the
Yeah,
NDEers describe their life on Earth as a role play, a cameo
yeah,
role,
yeah,
being assigned a certain role, and when our physical body dies, we're hooked off the stage. In other words,
yeah.
and we return home, and our role is finished. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it's a direct analogy there. And if I can come back and tie up a loose end, Laura, if I may,
Sure.
you
Just
what?
jump in here, Douglas.
Yeah,
Just jump in.
what
You're
you
so
said
polite.
a couple of minutes ago resonated with me so much
Hmm.
because it was a lesson that I distilled from the NDE accounts I read. And you said that some of the things that we regard on Earth as really important
Hmm.
are regarded in the world of spirit as irrelevant,
Hmm.
insignificant, or superficial.
Yeah.
And what we regard on Earth as a trivial action is often regarded in the world of spirit as the most profound manifestation of
Yes.
love.
Hmm.
So if I can cite one other NDE example, following up on what you said. This fellow, when he lived, I think he lived in the USA, he was a very prominent and affluent business person. And he was walking down the street one day, and he was a philanthropist. He did give to charities and was
Hmm.
quite gratified that he could. He had the opportunity to do so. But he saw a young woman at a bus stop, and she was quite disheveled and
Hmm.
looked broken, and her head was hung over, and he stopped and asked, are you okay? And sat down beside her. And he spent about 20 minutes with her and perked her up a little bit and might have given her some support and said, well, if you're okay, then I'll proceed on my way. And he left her. in a better condition than when he first met her.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on his life review, he was asked, "What did you do in your life that was not motivated or actuated by the prospect of personal gain?"
Mm-hmm.
So he came to mind, well, I was a regular uh, charitable giver. I
Yeah.
gave to all of these different charities.
Mm-hmm.
And the being of light said, no, no, you have much more profound manifestations of love during your earthly lifetime. And he had actually forgotten this experience, but he was shown in the
A lot of
instantaneous.
people do, right? They say that they forgot about these little things.
And the being of light said, "You helped this young woman. Had you not intervened, she was going to take her own life. But in the end, she resolved not to because of the kindness you manifested towards her." And that is the point. That is the point here. That those things that we regard as important on earth are not considered so in the realm of spirit. It's the small kindnesses that matter. And if you look at the Holy Quran, there's a chapter in the Quran called the small kindnesses. These are things that we've probably forgotten that we've done, but they are considered in the realm of spirit to be the most profound manifestations of love. One example was feeding a stray cat and taking it to a temporary shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Or the example you gave, as you're leaving a shopping center, helping an elderly person with their bag of groceries. These are the things that really matter in the
They
realm of
do.
spirit. And this, I believe, Laura, is what is to be communicated to humanity at this point in human history. I believe we're on the cusp or threshold of a great spiritual era in which the unseen world, which has hitherto been largely unknowable to us,
Mm-hmm.
is now being revealed, thanks in no small part to the revelations which have been brought back by the NDEs from the veil. And if I may be permitted to indulge myself in another quotation,
Please do.
again, it's from the Holy Quran, from chapter 17, The Journey by Night, verse 85. And it goes something to this effect: "The world of spirit is one of the things the knowledge of which is only with God or with Allah or the Source.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity has been given only a little knowledge thereof. But I detect in the last 5 years or so that this knowledge of the unseen realms has been opening up exponentially
Mm-hmm.
due to the NDEs, to people such as yourselves who've taken on board the task of sharing the light with others, by Reiki masters, by people conversant with communicating with angels. In the realm of spirit, which was mostly the province of the source or God up until now in human history,
Mm-hmm.
for a higher purpose, which maybe we don't know at the current time, but ultimately it will be revealed. This is now being shared with humanity. And this is the main purpose of my book, to answer the questions that really matter, which up until now have been considered metaphysical. Metaphysical in the sense that they cannot be answered by science or medicine, by an objective study of material reality. So many of us, at some point in our lives, we think, well, is there God? Or is there a source or a supreme being? Is there a heaven? What happens when I die? Some of us might fear death. When I die, what happens? Does my consciousness evaporate into an empty void of nothingness?
Mm-hmm.
Or does my consciousness transcend the death of my body? Does it transcend time and space? What are the higher spiritual realms like? What is the meaning of life on Earth?
Mm-hmm.
Is humanity alone in the cosmos? Many believe we are alone.
No, we're not.
The NDEs say that um, there are an infinite number of universes, dimensions, and realms of existence,
Great.
both seen and unseen, of vast complexity, only a few of which interact with planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So to think that humanity, we are alone in the universe, has been described by many NDEs as somewhat xenophobic. We are not alone. in terms of spiritual evolution, we are right down there.
We are, when I connect with the other side, including, say, when you go into the Akashic records, I deal with them. We call them the masters, teachers, and loved ones. My mentor taught me that. And there are beings from other realms, including ascended masters and angels and elementals. And I mean, I could go on and on and on, right? But the one thing I wanted to mention, I don't think I had mentioned during this show, I always say I've been so deeply blessed to be there hundreds of times at the beginning of life. I worked in the NICU with critically ill little ones. And then when I worked out in the community, when I hurt my back, yes, I did lots of technical stuff and program development and what have you. But the thing that really touched my life and changed my life, and I almost didn't take that job, was I started, it was called, for those of you that aren't from Canada, but it was called the Victorian Order of Nurses, and it still exists today. And we did community nursing. And I was hired, and then I found out that I was going to, you'll know where it is coming from Thunder Bay, the Simpson Street, East End area of
Yes,
the city.
yes.
That was my area to run full time. And I used to go into, you'll know the old hotels that no longer stand, but the Empire and the West,
Mm-hmm.
very
Yes.
dangerous hotels. I used to go in there all on my own, went in my office once every 2 weeks. That kid always used to joke and say it could have been strung up and hung up on a wall and no one would have found me for weeks. But you know what I
Well, you
found?
had,
That there was murder there. There was everything you could possibly think of the lowest vibrational energy and crime. I found some of the most profound, beautiful people that had nothing, that would give you the clothes off their back. I found it was the biggest life teacher for me, because I can tell you where I'm going with this is my most rewarding part of my career was doing palliative care and being at the bedside if somebody chose to die at home. And I can tell you, from looking after people that were multimillionaires to the poorest of the poor, and nobody ever said, I wish I had more money. I wish I had did this. I wish I had, it was about material things. It was always, I wish I had let the people around me who meant the most to me, to let them know how much I love them, and things like that. And including when people did pass away terminally, and even when it was unexpected, but especially terminally. And I'm writing a book about this actually. We would witness as nurses some of the most profound, miraculous, beautiful things that were completely unexplainable, including many of them talked about loved ones being there. And don't you see
mhm.
the angels? And don't you see this? And just super profound, including the gift. I've named it the gift. You'll hear other palliative nurses call it many things, where somebody that the physical signs of them ready to leave the earth are there. And all of us, it doesn't always happen, but quite a few times it did, where the person, you might get 5 or 10 minutes, you might get 6 or 8 hours. Those ones were hard with families because they would think a miracle had happened. But the person was perfectly lucid, able to be exactly like who they were before they got sick, and sort of complete or finish off those conversations. And so it'd be interesting to hear in your research. You mentioned the beings of light, but did you run into many that ran into family and things like that? Or was it always Was it always a being of light in your research with an NDE? Or
Well, if I can return to this phenomenon you've been referring to, Laura,
Mhm.
it's what Dr. Eben Alexander refers in his book to terminal lucidity. And this is
Ooh.
quite a common phenomenon experienced by the medical profession and members such as yourself, that when the person is about to pass,
Mhm.
their cognitive abilities return intact,
Mhm.
even though they might have had a debilitating mental
Mhm.
issues.
I call it the gift.
The
I don't know where it
gift.
comes from, but it's a gift.
And if I
Mhm.
can share with you, I was watching a documentary on the life of Johnny Cash
Okay.
recently, the country and western singer.
Yep. Mhm.
And he had a brother, an older brother. His name was Jack.
Mhm.
And Johnny and Jack loved each other dearly. They were very close as brothers.
Mhm.
And one day, Jack was working at a lumber mill, and somehow he got caught in the blade of a saw, and it ripped open his chest cavity. And he lingered for about 1 day. And in
Mhm.
the hospital, Johnny and his mother and the grieving family were around Jack, who was given no hope to survive. And at one point, shortly before he passed, the brother of Johnny Cash, Jack, said, "Mama, can you hear the angels? Can you
Aw.
hear the angels singing, Mama?
Mhm.
It's so beautiful, and I want to go and join them."
Mhm.
This is an example of terminal lucidity. I've heard of many accounts of this happening, that your life partner might have passed away 20 years before
Mhm.
you're about to. But that loving partner comes back and is ready to escort
Mm.
you down the tunnel of light to the veil, to be greeted by other relatives, your spirit guides, your guardian angels, and so forth. And that's been the object of study by the medical profession, and there's something to it. The medical people and the scientists haven't been able to discount it because it happens so often, and there seems to be something real to it.
Mhm.
So I have heard of that. I didn't. I don't recall in reading the NDE accounts um, many such encounters, because after all, these are people who actually came back and survived.
Mhm.
They they didn't cross over the veil.
Mhm.
So they do say they proceed down the tunnel of light, and sometimes they are accompanied by deceased relatives who act as guides
Mhm.
during the out-of-body experience until the experience is over.
I have to ask you, Kathy, I haven't forgotten about your question, because Kathy had added death is to me is liberating. And I am going to get to your question in just a sec, but I've been dying to ask you about this. In your research, because I have done a lot of research in this area, because it is just so profound to me, because I truly believe that little children, very young children, just like animals, can very clearly see spirit. I call it spirit collectively. And I used to say it was because they live in the now, right? They're not encumbered with bills and worrying about what's going to happen a week
Mhm.
down the road. And then I believe I can connect with my guides and the others. I think we all can. It's just being, oh, we've never been led to believe that. But my whole point is, I was about to say that on one show, I think I was a guest, and I literally heard it's because they've been told that they can't, that they've never been told they can't. Like they've never been told they can't see spirit or they can't hear spirit or what have you. But I really looked at the near death experiences of children, and I'd love to hear if you've looked at that, because it's just, I don't know if it's because they're so close to where they've come from, with not many years in between, or what it is. So I'd love to hear what you found with
Sure.
that.
I don't recall any of the NDE written accounts being written by young children, or whether it was written by a guardian or a parent, or
Okay.
what have you. But I can tell you this, Laura. Children young children have spontaneity, they have joy,
Mm-hmm.
they have purity and innocence, they have humility, they are gentle, they are quiet.
No
These are
hatred.
all divine qualities.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, they live in the now.
Mm-hmm.
They are not distracted by the many amusements and distractions and worries of this world.
Mm-hmm.
They are happy and spontaneous. As such, they are closer to the source or the energy in the higher spiritual realm. And I've seen many documentaries in which children have a so-called invisible friend.
Oh yeah, work with a lot of parents with that.
And I believe, my belief doesn't matter, but I do believe that this is authentic. This is genuine. That,
Absolutely.
that they have not delved into negative energy as most adults have, and they are purer and more innocent, and as such, they can connect with the energy of these other realms much better than we can as adults.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think there is something to that. And if you look at religious scripture, it's something to be like a child. In fact, one of the NDEs said, "What a blessing it is to end your life on earth with the attitude of a little child." Children have joy. They're spontaneous. They're curious about things. They want to learn more and more. They're pure. They're innocent. And
No
what a way to
hatred.
live this life. No hatred, no aggression. Young children, they don't find fault with others. They don't have fear.
Mm-hmm.
Fear is one of the greatest negative energies that we have. Some of us fear living, others fear
Absolutely.
dying. But that's another main message of the NDEs. Fear is a human or earthly construct. It is a really intense form of negative energy that holds us back from the light, the energy of the
It's
source.
the chains that bind us because fear is what's, again, when I was talking about end of life, the regrets people had. Go do it now. Don't wait till you lose those 30 pounds or I'm going to do this once I do that. Do it now. And the only thing that stops us, people will, as a spiritual medium and psychic, people will ask me questions. Well, should I do this? Should I do this? You obviously are feeling the call to do it. And there's an old saying, jump in the net will appear. And I know it's very cliche,
Mhm.
but it's true. And what people forget too, that all we have is now. That word's already in the past. We can't change it. I just said now. All we can do is move forward. And, and you'll see, and I'm sure you've seen this with your research with NDEers, the fear is gone. There's not a fear of death. They know that we're looked after. They know why we're here. They know that we're here to live life and experience it to its fullest and utmost. Would you agree with the research you've seen?
Yes. The NDEs say that when our soul leaves our physical body,
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that we can take with us is the love we've manifested to others.
Mm-hmm.
That love that we gave others is ours to keep for an eternity. Everything else we leave behind. And that is what Eastern mystics call detachment.
Oh,
Detachment
interesting.
from the world.
Mm-hmm.
That issues of personal power, notoriety, fame, material wealth, etc., we can't take them with us when we die. So why do we preoccupy ourselves with them during our earthly incarnations?
Because people want fame, they want power, and then when they get, and I always ask this to people that are exorbitantly wealthy and they continue to try and accrue more and more wealth, and I'm not trying to be judgmental, it's just like, when is enough? Like, I always say, if I ever won the lottery, all I'd want to do is make sure my children were financially comfortable. I'm financially comfortable. And then the rest, like I said, I adore animals. My co-host David and I always joke, if we won the lottery, well, we don't joke, we would do it, is open up an animal rescue for people, or you know what I mean? Like help others with the wealth. There's enough of everything on this
Absolutely.
planet. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, Laura. My wife and I love animals dearly. We have 4
Mm-hmm.
pets, and we donate to animal charities. But yes, this is the point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we, the NDEs consistently reassure us that a beautiful afterlife is awaiting us.
Mm-hmm.
So why fear the death of our body? In fact, many of the NDEs, when they come back, they say, "I can't wait to die again. I can't wait to get back there.
That's true.
What I experienced was so beautiful."
You
But
know what? I
Earth,
was so glad that you said. I want to throw this in here quick. Sorry, but you brought this up, and then there's so much I could talk for hours about this because it's so incredible, and I wish more people would know this instead of being afraid. But I have not met one NDE that has come back. Maybe there has been one, and I always say if there has, maybe it's because they needed to experience what I'm about to say, because for whatever, to learn something from it. But every single person, either in mediumship or NDE years, their soul leaves the body before the actual physical death happens. And then us as people on this, the family that's left behind and what have you, we torture ourselves with the thought of what our loved one went through, but they always report they don't experience the actual physicalness of their death. Like, say it's something very painful. When they go back, I've seen many talk about, like, I had to go back into this horrible broken body, say if they got in an accident or something. Did you see that too?
I did, Laura. A number of NDE accounts said that if you have had a chronic disease or illness,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
of course suffer with that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment of death, the actual death of your physical body, it's painless.
Mm-hmm.
It's a simple,
Easy as
peaceful
going to sleep.
transition.
As
Yes,
easy as going to sleep, they always say.
exactly. It's like going to sleep without going to sleep
Mm-hmm.
because you enter realms of elevated awareness and expanded consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also heard what you've just said, that coming back to your body, when the being of light said, "No, you can't stay, you must return to your earthly life," that coming back and being forced back into your human body is uncomfortable because our physical body essentially entraps our soul or consciousness.
It's dense and heavy and clumsy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like a caterpillar. And when we die, our physical body dies, we turn into a butterfly. And we leave our dense lower vibrations behind and enter a realm of higher vibrations and
Mm-hmm.
elevated awareness and expanded consciousness. And I'd like to come back to another point that you made that again excited me. I can't help myself. The eternal now.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. Buddhist philosophy says we must live in the now, the present moment. Because if we're always thinking of the past, worried about the future, we can't undertake our daily tasks wholeheartedly or undistractedly. We will always undertake them superficially, or in the past or in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But according to the NDEs, in the realm of spirit, in heaven, for example, there is no such thing as the past or the
There's no
future.
time.
Time, time as we experience it on earth is linear or
Mm-hmm.
sequential. But in the world of spirit, there is only the present, the eternal now. However, the present, according to the NDEs, includes everything that has gone before and everything that will ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, our spirits or our consciousness, when we're in the world of spirit, we transcend the restrictions of earthly time and space. we can
Absolutely.
essentially become time travelers.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. There was one soul who, I think during the life review, um, he or she had an intense interest in New York City of the
Okay.
1940s,
Hmm.
had read heaps of books and watched all the movies of New York City in the 1940s.
Hmm.
So the spirit guide decided, well, I'll take you back there if you want to go.
Okay.
So instantaneously, the soul found itself on a New York street
Hmm.
in the 1940s. It knew
Yeah.
that because it could see the style of attire or fashion,
Cars and
buildings, the type of cars. And this was reiterated by Dr. Eben Alexander in
yeah.
Proof of Heaven, that in the world of spirit, we can access any time, any historical period or place on earth. All that we have to do is think of it.
Yeah.
We, we move the consciousness towards it. So movement in the world of spirit is controlled by our thoughts. So I'm really excited because one of my hobbies is a
Hmm.
study of Roman military history. So I'd
Okay.
love to go back and see the conquests of Julius Caesar in
You
Gaul.
could do it now, though. You know how you can do it
I haven't
is
mastered the
remote
technique.
viewing. Remote
Remote
viewing.
viewing.
You absolutely you can go back. Most people aren't as adept as
Mhm.
moving forward, but I've actually taken a couple courses with it, and I am telling you, some people can do it naturally. You can remote
Wow.
view. You could go back there. You could see it. You could probably find some buried treasure that was done. You could do all kinds of stuff. You can do it. I swear to God, you can.
I wasn't aware of that. I've learned something new, Laura.
Well,
And
we'll have to talk
what
more
I'm,
because I'll
I'm
connect
being
you with some resources, but anybody can do
exactly.
remote viewing.
Oh,
Just
I'd love to learn it. Can anyone learn it?
anybody can learn it. You
Mhm.
have to practice a bit at it. Like I said, some people are naturals at it. I will tell you before
Mhm.
we didn't get to Kathy's question, but you know what? I might just have to have Douglas right back on again, and we'll have to again in the future, near
Oh,
future, we can continue this
right.
conversation. But
Oh,
with
I'd love to come back.
I'd love to have you back. So,
Mhm.
what I was going to say with the remote viewing, um, there was actually in the US military, there's a movie called The Men Who Stared at Goats with George Clooney. And there was a couple other stars in it. It was based on the unit of the US military. I think it was called Project Stargate. And they had a remote viewing actually unit, and Lynn Buchanan was part of that. He's actually in his 80s, but he's still teaching. I think it's Lori Johnson is her last name. I always get her last name wrong. They run a free 4-day masterclass. Dr. Chuck Kennedy, he does a different type of remote viewing. He teaches, but I'm telling you, you can do it. There's a guy actually that one of the business people, big companies hire around here very quickly because they're almost out of time. That they hire him because he remote views into the future and can tell them whether a certain business endeavor is going to be successful or not.
That is fascinating, Laura. I wasn't aware that you can remote view in the past,
Yeah,
but that's tremendous. I'd like to do more reading on that, actually.
I'll send. Well, we'll talk for a minute or two. I know it's early over there and it's Tuesday morning, but I'll make sure I can get a hold of you afterwards, and I'll send you some
Mhm.
resources or anybody else who's interested. You got. Well, I'm going to tell you at the end, anyways, how to get a hold of me. I'll send you some resources and tell you how to get a hold of it. Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Hmm. So people shared some wonderful comments. Sorry, guys. You know, we pull up comments, and a lot of you shared some really profound experiences that you either went through having your own NDE or that you experienced when you were at the bedside with a loved one. And we really appreciate the comments that you left here. So thank you for sharing them, even if we didn't get a chance to read them. But we only got a few minutes left. So how can people get a hold of you? Because this isn't your first book you've written, is it, Douglas?
No, no, it isn't, Laura. I wrote a book that was published last year
Mhm.
called Transcendental Spirituality, Wisdom,
Okay.
and Virtue.
Oh, I
And
love
it
it.
looks at 12 of the world's mainstream religions from
Mhm.
the East and the West and it identifies 36 universal ethical principles which binds or unites these 12 religions together. But what
Ooh.
I found was that in terms of this religious diversity, there's an underlying spiritual unity. And that spiritual unity was reflected in my second book, which I've spoken to today,
Mhm.
in terms of positive energy. And I'm
Ooh.
excited to tell you that in August, I have a third book coming out called The Near Death Experience and Sacred Scripture, The Parallel Messaging.
Well,
So,
you might be coming on more than one more time because you're going to have to come on and talk about the new book. I didn't mean to cut you off, but so quickly, what's it about the third one? Because you're going to have to come back and talk about that if you will.
well, it closes the loop, so to speak. It examines the distinct similarities and parallels, the uncanny parallels between what you can find in sacred scripture of both Eastern and Western religions and what the NDEs have reported in terms of what they learned at the Veil. So
Ooh.
this is out in August,
Okay.
and I'm excited to talk about that book as well. So I'm happy to come back on
Oh.
the program. I'm very sorry I didn't get a chance to address the comments or questions of your audience,
That
but
they understand. They were very vested in the conversation because sometimes we have, like, I have so many things I wanted to ask you, but we didn't even get to.
well, I'm a very open person. I'm quite happy for your listeners to contact me by my personal email. It's dchodson53 at gmail.com. And I don't
Okay.
mind if they want to contact me and ask me questions or say, yeah, that resonated with what I experienced. So, yeah, happy to
Everybody's
do that.
leaving great comments. I'm highlighting them right now. Everybody's enjoyed you. We'll have Douglas back on. This is some of our regular crew that's usually here that left the comments. And I always put up a banner on all social media platforms so people know when you're coming back on. And then you guys, if you're open to it, please share. We'll get it. I wanted to hear more about this because I'm always fascinated by people who do the amount of research that you've done with near-death experiencers. So I really appreciate that. Lastly, though, before I tell people where to get a hold of me, where can they buy your books?
Well, Amazon US or Amazon Canada,
Okay.
Kindle, through my publisher Zero Books, www.zerobooks.com.
Mhm.
Most online booksellers, Barnes and Noble, Indie, Hive, yeah,
Okay.
chapters in Canada. But I
Okay.
very much connected with you, Lori, in terms of what you've experienced and
Mhm.
what I read in the NDE accounts. There was a remarkable synchronicity.
Mhm.
So thank you
I
very
think
much
it
for having me
started
on.
before the show. For those of you joining late, if you don't realize, I did not know this about my guests. As I've told you, I usually get just a few minutes before we go on the show. But Douglas did his homework on who I was the night before. And guess what we found out, everybody? Douglas is from the city I live in that I've grown up in and lived my whole life, Thunder Bay, Ontario, but he's over in Australia.
Mhm.
Like, what are the chances?
And Lori, before you go,
Mhm.
that part of Fort William that you worked as a nurse and had
Yeah.
those profound experiences,
Mhm.
I used to drive a taxi cab in that same area. And in fact, my
My
grandma,
eldest son lives in that area now, not on
all
Simpson,
right,
and it's becoming young people's areas to buy houses now, and that's where my
okay.
son lives.
And that was the education of my life. I
Mhm.
learned more as a taxi
Mhm.
driver than I did spending 7 or 8 years in university.
I
So I
agree.
agree with you.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was life changing. You guys, I want to thank you all so much for being here. As always, I want to thank you, Douglas, for being here. I can't wait to have you back
Mhm.
on.
Thank you.
And if you ever want to get a hold of me to either book a reading, I do energy healing, I do Akashic records, I do teaching and mentoring. You can get a hold of me on facebook.com/slash the angel rock, or just message me. You can get a hold of me on under Lorilei Potvin or the Angel Rock on any social media platform you can think of. I'm on there. Also, I have two groups on Facebook: Paranormal University for all things paranormal, the Angel Rocker Tribe for more of the spiritual type things like what we talked about tonight. Also, don't forget to join me. I'll be back Thursday night, 7 p.m. with David Hansel with The Thing at the Foot of the Bed. And don't forget, we've also got a group for that, or for that show, I guess I should say, because we show lots of clips and things like that. It's the best and easiest way to find it. It's on Facebook under the same name, The Thing at the Foot of the Bed. Again, thank you so much for being here, Douglas.
It
And
was
I
my
want to
pleasure. Thank you.
thank you. And I also want to say very quickly, if you've enjoyed what you're seeing, don't forget to hang around. We've got Philip and Julia Syracusa, friends of mine, and obviously our network, with the Horsefly Chronicles coming up next. All right. We'll see you on Thursday, everybody, and next Monday again.
Okay.
Much love and light, everybody. Stay tuned for a sec, Douglas.
Thank you.
Please.